Hello and welcome to my contribution for the Festive Tech Calendar 2022 event. My name is Brian Gorman, and I'm an Azure MVP and an MCT, and I have a number of Azure certifications. So if you're interested in learning more about Azure certifications, please reach out. I'd love to talk to you. Ultimately, I'm writing a book on AZ204, so look for that soon. Also, I'd like to take a moment to thank Gregor Sutty and Keith Atherton, who are generous enough to host this event and kind enough to let me be a part of it. I love this event, and I'm glad that they let me get a chance to do this today. So thank you. All right, so before we get started, I just want to show you what we're going to build today. We're going to build a to-do list. So making a list and checking it twice. I thought that was a really nice Christmas theme. And ultimately, on the list, you'll be able to use authorization, log in, have the right people see only their to-do list items, and ultimately be able to enter items. So get the video made that I'm doing right now, right? And actually, that's not Tom's task, right? That's it'll be done soon. So, but also with this, you're going to be able to log in, register and log in using Microsoft Identity. And so once you're able to do that, you can log in and give it a fake email address if you want. It doesn't have to be your actual Azure email address, which is nice. And then you can do your task. So this one should say get the video done, right? And ultimately, that's going to be in progress at this point. So there we go. All right, let's get started. So the first part of this is going to be really basic. We're just going to create a repo, and then ultimately this will be where you can pull the zip file from. So I'm just going to call this FTC 2022, making a list and checking it twice. I'm going to create it private for now, but I'll turn it to public when it's time for this to go live in a few days. So this is just going to be the to-do list resources for my FTC 2022 talk. It's private, and I'm not going to do README or all the licensing and all that jazz. So just go ahead and create that repo, which gives me a chance to push some information to it. All right, so there's my folder where everything is. Inside of this folder is going to be the zip file that you'll need to get started and the project that I'm working on today to make it live. So the final project will be there when this is all done. So we're going to go ahead and get init, and we'll get add dot and get commit initial commit, and I'm going to just go ahead and tag that 0.1 starter state or something like that. Push everything out. Oops, I don't have my remote set, so let's do that quick. Get remote add origin, get push -u origin main. So now everything's out there. And again, the zip file is what you're going to want to get started with. And then ultimately, all the project stuff that I'm working with is here at the repo. So this will give me a place to host my application code that I can then leverage from an Azure pipeline. Let's go ahead and get the project opened up so we can start working on it. So while that's loading, I want to tell you that as I was doing this, I started learning about identity and had a chance to work through a few things because one of my students actually asked me a little bit more about working with identity and challenged me a little bit. So I was able to actually look into overriding the default user in Azure and do a couple things there. So what I ended up doing was actually creating a quick video. So I wanted to share that with you. Ultimately, if you go out to my training.majorguidesandSolutions.com, there's a course that I do called Blog Posts and Talks. It's free. You don't have to sign up or anything. They're all pretty much in preview. After a while, I archive them, but then you have to be signed up to see them. But like for now, like all of 2022 is available. It's called Making the Simple To-Do Web Project for Festive Tech. And so ultimately on there, I just did a quick video about how we could possibly override some of the identity. So it's about 15 minutes long, and it's free if you want to watch that in addition to this stuff. So in that, we talk about going in and actually overriding this identity with a user and talking about these pages and such. So that's a little bit out of the scope for what we're doing here today. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that out now. But if you want to watch that video, you're certainly welcome to do that. So now that we have the starter web app, the first thing we need to do is run our migrations. So this project is layered. It has two data contexts. We have the to-do list data context, and we have the data context for the application, for the identity, basically the to-do users. So we need to run both of those and ultimately make sure your app settings is pointing to a database that makes sense. So FTC 2022 TODO Web DB or something similar. And I'm just going to call this live because that way it's brand new in case I have the old version here. So it doesn't really matter what you name it, right? So we'll just do a quick update database. Context is going to be application DB context. And that will, of course, stub in the identity. And then update database context is the to-do list data context. And that will stub in the to-do stuff. So now that I have that, I can run my app out of the gates. Everything should be built. So I shouldn't have to do a lot of coding today, hopefully. But ultimately here we have my tasks. So right now my tasks are available to everybody. So any random user can do this. So this is Brian from Anonymous, right? And so my task is in progress. We save the changes. That's there. If I register a user, register Bob at bob.com. And ultimately Bob comes in, logs in. Bob right now goes to the tasks. He sees Brian Anonymous. This is Bob. Bob's task. Bob's task is completed, but Bob's seeing my task and I'm seeing his, and I can affect his and he can see mine. And if we do Tom at tom.com as well, same problem. Tom is able to see everybody's stuff. So not an ideal scenario right now for this application, right? So we have shared. Basically, we have the shared list of contacts. Nothing is being differentiated between the users at all. And so, big problem. Tom's task here is also in the list. So we can see that all these different tasks are available to us. You can change them if you're interested. You can change the status right there, or you can edit it and change the code. So that's just how that's all the app does. It's not very robust, but hopefully you can see that in play. So, all right, so we have our repository, we have everything done, everything's working. So let's create an app service at Azure and deploy the application to it. All right, so we're going to go out to Azure, and what we're going to do is we're going to create an app service. And the app service will be essentially utilized to host this application, and we'll back it with a SQL database at Azure as well. So I'm just going to create a new resource group called FTC 2022, making a list and checking it twice. Yeah, malice it. That's awesome. All right, and the web application name, how about FTC 2022, making a list and checking it twice. Now this has to be a unique, fully qualified domain name so that nobody else has it in the world. Oh, look, I've got my demo out there already. So fortunately, when I was practicing my run through, it's still there. It's making a list and checking it. We'll call it that today. It's fine. Ultimately, they're both, it really doesn't matter. Just name it something useful. Runtime stack is going to be .NET 7. And ultimately, this will be hosted. I'm going to do Windows. You can make the argument you might be able to do Linux since it is .NET 7 core. Basically, we're fine there. Central US is me. I'm going to go create a new ASP FTC 2022, making a list and checking it twice. And I'm going to put that, I'm just going to do the free plan today. We don't need slots for this, and this is just a quick demo. So the free plan is sufficient. For the deployment, I'm going to click Enable. I'm going to be wired up to my GitHub, and my organization is going to be me. And then my repo is the FTC 2022, making a list and checking it twice. I'm going to grab that and make sure that we select the right one here. And the main branch, and ultimately that will hook up my CI/CD for me without me doing any work, which is really nice. And the networking on a free plan doesn't matter. The monitoring, I'm going to leave this on for a new application insights. So you could turn that on later if you wanted to. It is not orchestrated on the app, so if you want it, you'd have to add it. And then ultimately, that's everything we need to get our app service deploying. Okay, so while that's deploying, let's go ahead and do a SQL database, an Azure SQL. So I'm going to create this. And we'll do it in Rise and put it in the Festive Tech Calendar Malice-it group. And we're going to do the database name is going to be FTC 2022 Malice-it. It's fine. And the server, I'll create a new one here. FTC 2022 Malicet DB. And using SQL authentication, my user is just going to be the to-do list web user, and the password, something unique and robust that matches all the password standards, of course. To create the SQL database here, it's not going to be Elastic Pool. This is a development version, and then I'm going to go ahead and switch this to a basic. So we're going to get to about $4.90 a month. Local redundant storage. We'll do the public endpoint so we can access it. Allow Azure and my client IP so I can test locally or run queries in the portal if I need to for my local IP. And ultimately everything else should be good. So this shouldn't need anything else modified. Neither should this or this. So we'll go ahead and create the database. So about $5 a month for that database to back this simple app for testing purposes. Not bad at all. So hopefully the making a list and checking it twice is done at this point, and it is. So what we're going to have to do eventually here is wire up the database, and that will happen in this configuration section. We'll go here and we will add connection strings for the 2 connection strings. I'll have to wait till this is completed in order to get those connection strings though. So in the meantime, let's take a look at the repo. And here we should have, hopefully if I got the right one, an action running, and we do. So the action is running. It has a 2-stage application, a 2-stage build and deploy. And so that's what's done by default by Azure. We get the GitHub action running. It's going to build. It's going to publish an artifact to the uploads here at GitHub. And then ultimately, the second stage of this will publish it out to Azure. So there's a lot of stuff within this default pipeline that I'd like to change real quick, or just at least a couple things before I do anything else. So in the GitHub workflows, here's where they actually put the action. It's this YAML file. So it has a push on main, as well as a trigger that you can just run it manually, which is really nice. Runs on Windows latest. Let's go ahead and edit this. We're going to change this to Ubuntu latest. That will speed up the build by about 75%. And then ultimately, I'm going to leave all the stuff that they did here, but what I want to do is on the upload artifact, I'm going to change this to say retention days 1, because I don't want to keep that forever. Ultimately, the retention days is like 90 days by default, but this does use space at GitHub, and I've run out of space before in the free accounts, so I don't want to do that. So I don't need these archived uploads artifacts that they're doing on that first part of the stage. So that's all I'm changing there. Everything else is the same, but what you see is this Azure App Service publish profile was generated. So in case you're interested, all that is when you create your app service, you actually can get a publish profile. This is just the XML publish profile you're probably used to using to publish maybe to another server or something. But ultimately it's that, that long XML jazz that we use to publish, right? Well, that's all it is. What they did was they went out to GitHub and they basically installed that. I'm going to go ahead and commit these changes. They installed that into my secrets. So under my secrets here, under my actions, I have the Azure App Service publish profile. So you can't ever change it. You can't see it. So the only thing you can do is update it. So if that was wrong for some reason, or if I wanted to deploy somewhere else using the publish profile, I would just drop the new one in here. The XML the whole entire raw XML that you could download would go right here. So if you were setting it up manually, same thing. Now there's other ways to do publishing from GitHub. You can actually use credentials or service principals or whatever you want to do to publish, especially if you're going to deploy ARM templates, you're going to need to do that. But for this simple app, we're just going to let the default work. The second action will kick off here in a second. Once the first one's done, the second one, it's probably going to be a race condition now to see which one gets done first at this point. But hopefully the actions will complete and run quickly and get out to Azure. So at this point, we should have our database completed. And here it is. So all I'm going to do is go grab my connection strings. And I'm going to replace my password. So I have to do that myself here. So give me 1 second. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that connection string then, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to my configuration. My app has 2 connection strings that need to be set up, default connection and to-do list DB connection. So we're going to set up 2 connections here. So we'll start with default connection. We'll place that in here and switch it to Azure SQL. And it doesn't matter if it's a deployment slot setting or not, since there's no slots, so we'll just leave that unchecked. I'm going to do one more. This is going to be the to-do list data. I better double check this. To-do list data DB connection. Once again, that value will be my password and all the information that you shouldn't see, and the connection to my database. So once again, that'll be my connection string to the database, same one as before. Even though they're going to the same database, I still need both context leveraged there. So with those two connection strings in place, I'm going to go ahead and save it, continue. Now that's going to, of course, reboot the app as well, but ultimately now I'll have my two connections set up and my configuration is done for the application. So while a couple things are loading here, another thing I want to show you real quick, in case something went wrong with your deployment or whatever, if you can't connect locally or if your Azure services weren't turned on, the set server firewall on the SQL database lets you do that. So you can come out here and you can add your client IP address if it wasn't added before. So you click on that and add it. Obviously mine's already there. And then also there's a checkbox down here to allow Azure services. And that would allow the website to connect to the SQL Server. So if those aren't there, you probably want those there. All right, so we should be good. Probably even an action's completed at this point. And yep, they are. So we could go out and look at our website at this point, but we don't have our migrations applied. So how do you do your migrations? I'm really interested to know. I don't have a real good solution for my demos. And so what I end up doing is I typically just create a real quick migration code change that basically forces them to run. Now, if you're in the camp of roll forward, this isn't a bad change because it basically means you can never roll your database back, but it's not really super secure or safe or something you probably want to do because immediately as soon as you deploy, you're going to roll forward. So maybe you don't want to do that against your production databases, right? So hopefully at this point though, we have our web app out there. Now we just need to be able to store it in the database. So right now we can't. And the reason is because the migrations aren't applied. So let's do that. All right, so we need to set our project to do some automatic migrations. Now, I think that I've already put the code in place for this, so we just need to turn it on. And hopefully that's the case for most of the things we're doing today. So you don't have to really do a lot on your own. So yeah, so we should have some code right here on uncomment this code to enable migrations, which ultimately, again, is going to be not something that you necessarily want to do. I do this with the caveat that this is a test application. And once again, once you enable this code, it is going to force migrations, which means that even if you run the rollback command, it will run it forward again immediately. So you can't roll back. But this will also allow me to very quickly and easily deploy to Azure and apply migrations. So that change is very simple. So I'm going to go ahead and push it out there. So enable auto migrations. So we'll push it out to Azure. Well, basically to GitHub, which will push it to Azure. That will automatically apply our migrations. So this is going to run for a minute. I'm not going to make you watch that. However, if you're trying to work along with me here, then pause the video while yours is deploying. I guess this is a good time to tell you as well that all of the stuff that we're doing in this video is also available on a blog post. The blog post is going to be out on my site as well. It's called Making a List and Checking It Twice on training.majorguidancesolutions.com. And then ultimately it's a walkthrough of everything I'm doing today. So there's getting the starter web, getting everything put into Azure, and everything in your Azure SQL database, all of the information you need to get everything set up correctly, connecting the application to the database, which we just did, and then ultimately we are just now enabling the migrations. So as you can see, we're about halfway through at this point. All right, we are deployed to Azure, so it's probably still spinning up here, but let's go ahead and push the envelope and see if we can get it to run. And hopefully the migration's automatically applied and there weren't errors. If there are, we'll see a 500 right now. Okay, so it looks like we have a database at this point. There's my task. So again, if I add anonymously, then the anonymous person gets to save changes. That's a big problem. We don't want that to happen at all. So we want everybody to be registered. So again, we'll do bob@bob.com. And Bob's going to have the ability to create. I'm just going to add that so I don't have to think about it going forward. So we'll log in, bob@bob.com. And Bob can have tasks. So Bob adds a task. and Bob's task is in progress, and or let's say Bob's task is completed. But also Tom comes along, same problem. And Tom has to also confirm his account, but once he's in there, Tom will be able to add tasks. But everybody can see everybody's stuff, and that's not what we want. That's definitely not what we want, right? You want your own tasks. You don't want anonymous people adding tasks, so we need to fix that. And that's going to be done through authorization. So let's go do that. Let's fix it quick. So this is an easy fix for the first part. The first thing we're going to do is just go to the to-do list controller, and we're going to simply add the authorize attribute to this. So by adding the authorize attribute, we're able to make sure that users can't see the My Tasks page without being logged in. So I'm going to run this locally just so you can see it. We'll eventually push this out to Azure, but it takes a while to do that. So if I go to My Tasks here, logged in, I'm good. But if I'm logged out and I go to My Tasks, it requires me to log in. So that's step one. But I also want to make sure that if I'm not even logged in, I don't see the My Tasks link at all. I want that gone. So what I'm going to do is make a quick change on the shared layout. So I have the shared layout, and ultimately here that is. And we have some links here. So we have to do make sure the user is authorized to use this link. Let me make it just a little smaller for now. Ultimately, we don't need that either. There it is. So this part right here, the code is all out on the web in the repo as well. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is make sure that you only see these links if you're logged in. So if the user identity name toString.length is greater than 0, show this route to the to-do list index. Furthermore, if they're in a role called admin, let's show them this thing called the administrator, which is ultimately the default to-list administration stuff that's generated when you scaffold the controllers. That stuff is still available on the app, but you have to be in the admin role, or we're going to make it so you have to be in the admin role to see those things. All right, so let's run this again. So now a logged in user should not even see the link to My Tasks, or a non-logged in user, should not even see the link to My Tasks. So it's not even there until you log in. Once you log in, now you can see My Tasks. But we still have the problem of making sure that this is unique to a user. We still have to see the authorization stuff. So if I went to the to-do list /admin index right now, so we can see that this stuff is still here. And once you're in the admin index, you can actually just create to-do lists and assign them and all that jazz. I don't have the user IDs here, but eventually you could add that if you wanted. So that is available to anyone right now. So that was the admin index. So what I need to do is lock that down with that role for the authorized. So we're going to go back to the controller, and on these methods that ultimately are in place for index, admin index. So we want the index to be open to anybody who's logged in, but the admin index we want to only be open if you're in a role. So we're going to add an authorize attribute here, and that's going to be roles equal admin. And we'll put that on most of these. We won't put it on delete because I'm leveraging the delete from within the postback for the other delete that we did for just everybody who's logged in. So you will be able to delete, but at least at this point, you won't be able to do the admin stuff without being in the admin role. So we'll leave delete open. And probably just need this one open, honestly, but I'm just going to be there. So the rest of the code is here. If you're interested in looking into this later, this is all the posting and stuff for working with the to-do list. That's all in place. And then ultimately, at some point, we're going to need to do some work with the user IDs. Okay, so let's make sure that you can only see well, basically everybody is locked down from the admin at this point. So if I try to go to the to-do list /admin index now, I get the access is denied, which is what I wanted. So the only person that can get to the overall admin at this point is someone who is authorized in the role of admin. So we need to add that. But first, we're going to start tracking user IDs. So let's do that next. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make it so that you can only see your own to-do tasks. So we'll do that with a field called the user ID. So we're going to go to the to-do list model and find this code here where I already have it in place to essentially add the user ID. So once we have the user ID added as a string, it's going to just map to the user ID from the context. Now, this is where using a layered approach might have a little bit of a drawback. So this is part of the reason I was looking into a few things. As far as I know, there's no way to join tables across contexts within Entity Framework. So essentially, I'm going to have to use my in-memory processes to make sure that I have the right user ID and that I store it in the database. And basically, there is a potential that I could make an error there because it isn't going to be directly related. I could store a user ID that doesn't actually exist in the table because of that. But the way that this works, we shouldn't have any worries too much on this, at least because we'll have the logged in user ID and we won't be able to, or we won't have to worry about it being completely out of whack. All right, so I'm going to flip to the to-do list data here, and I'm going to add a migration. And the migration is going to be called create user ID field to-do list item context. To-do list item, and then the context is going to be the to-do list data context. So basically, we're going to effect a migration to add that user ID field to the to-do list item so that they have the ability to be tracked. You see that's there. So we'll then update the database so that we have that. Now we just need to make sure that the code that's getting data is leveraging the correct way to make sure that we don't have to-do list items that aren't mapped to us. So right now, everything's done in the controller at this level. So if we go to the controller, to the index, we see that we have the context.to items not equal to null, and ultimately passing that context to-do list items to ultimately to the controller, to the view, excuse me. So we're going to have a new method, which is going to give us a user ID, and that's right here. The user ID is going to be the user.findFirstValue. We have to claims type, and the claims principal doesn't exist. So let's get that brought in using system security claims. There we go. And so ultimately, now we have the method in place. We have our items that we want to get here for the context to-do list items. So let's get the items as their own call. So items equals await context to-do items where the user ID to list, and then ultimately return if the item's not equal to null. Then we're going to go to the view and we're just going to pass the items to it. And ultimately, if they are null, let's change this to view. It's not really a problem. Let's do view, and then ultimately new list of to-do list item. So we'll pass a new list or the items, depending on what's there. So now at this point, when you're logged in, you should be able to start working with your users. And if you log in under Bob now, Bob should only see no tasks because Bob has currently not done any tasks under his user ID. So that's what we expected. So let's make sure we have a couple code changes that we want to get done here as well. So on the update to-do list item status, here, we want to make sure that we're leveraging the user ID. So the var item is equal to await context to-do item singular default x rocket x.id equals to-do ID becomes ultimately getting that user ID again and using the user ID mapping. So let's go ahead and just copy paste that, save a little time. So there it is, getting the ID, making sure it maps the ID and the user ID. So you only see your own stuff. In the update to-do list item code here, we do the same thing. We got the item equals await context singular default. That becomes the user ID as well. Same thing, sorry. In the add to-do list item, we just need to make sure that when we add it, we get the user ID and set that as we're creating the item. So item.detail text is this, item.user_id is equal to await current user ID. So basically we get that user ID set, so it's added with the user ID. So now we should be able to test the application, and we should be able to make and update to-do list items for ourselves. So this is now Bob's task number 1, and we'll put this in progress. And then we'll log out of Bob, we'll log in under Tom. And Tom also has tasks, but they're his own unique tasks. So Tom's task number 1. And once again, you can't do it as an anonymous person, so we're good on that. We now have everything in place. Let's just prove out that Bob still only sees Bob's stuff. There it is. So we're good. We've got our authorization in place. We've got authentication in place. We have a lot of stuff built. Now we're actually tracking to the right person. So that's awesome. So the next thing we want to do is implement Microsoft Identity as a way to log in so that we can add a third-party provider. So there's a few steps we have to do at Azure to make this happen, and a couple things we need to do in the application. So we'll do that next. All right, so to make Microsoft work, we have to first start by creating at the portal an application registration. So I'm just going to go to App Registrations, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new application registration here that's going to let us register this application. So I'm going to call this FTC 2022, making a list and checking it twice. And ultimately, I'm going to use the accounts in any organizational directory. So I don't know how to get this to work with a single tenant at this point. Every time I've tried that, it fails. So I think there's some extra configuration you have to do for that, just an FYI. But ultimately, the accounts here for any directory seems to work really well as the ones with the Xbox and Skype accounts as well. Personal, that Microsoft doesn't recommend using that one, so I would stay away from that one. But that's like, you know, your Hotmails and your Outlooks and stuff, I think. So probably don't want that anyway. Maybe you do. Ultimately, we need to create a redirect URI. So this is going to be a web, and this is going to be whatever your current application is running on. So if I run the application locally, unfortunately, I think I shut it off. I can check my port. I should have done that earlier. Apologize. It's localhost 7147. So I need that on my app registration. And at the end of this thing, I'm going to put sign in -Microsoft. And that's going to let my localhost test app basically use the Microsoft authentication from my local machine. So with that, I also am going to need one more URL. So I'm going to immediately do that as well. Underneath the authentication, we're going to add another URI here, which is just going to be this website we just created earlier, whatever your public-facing Azure websites.net is, without any links at the end, obviously. So you're going to add another URI here. It's going to be that, and ultimately that same sign in -Microsoft at the end of it. So that should take care of getting our login in place. The other thing we're going to need is a secret for the handshake. So if you've ever done any kind of authentication through Facebook or Google or Microsoft, you got to have your app secret and your client ID and such in order to make that happen. Oops, I forgot to save it. Thank you for reminding me. So there it is. And ultimately now I need to go ahead and make this certificate in secret. And I'm going to add a new client secret. And the description is just going to be something simple. Whatever I want it to be, like FTC 2022 web auth or something. And you can set different ranges for how long you'd like this to be valid. I'm just going to do 3 months for this because I'm probably going to delete this app pretty fast anyway. And you can see that what it does is it creates a value and a secret here. I have Azure Azure Mask on, so you can't see it, but I can copy that to my clipboard. I need that value. The secret ID is irrelevant. It's kind of funny, huh? Whatever. But you'll never get to see the value again, so make sure you copy that down and have it handy. Maybe put it in a LastPass or something if you need to keep it for some reason. But ultimately, that should take care of that. And then here's where the trick comes in. So it's kind of a little bit frustrating that there's this ID, the secret ID, and then ultimately there's this client ID. So this is the client ID you actually need up here. It's not the secret ID. So sometimes that's a little confusing. It's like, well, the ID and the secret ID and its value are right here. Why don't I need that? You don't. You need the application client ID, which is right here. And it's not the object ID. It's not this other stuff. It's the application client ID. So that one. And then ultimately the secret. And that's what you need to put in your app secrets. So if I have my app secrets for this project, manage secrets. So I have some other stuff here, obviously, from the fact that this thing bleeds over from other apps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to update this app secret client ID and my app secret for my new app. And I'm going to save that. And then I'll stop my project and rerun it here. Now, hopefully, well, I don't have Microsoft enabled yet. So, but that should give me everything I need to get that done. I also need to put those two same things. I need to put them on my app service. So let's go back to our app service at this point and make that happen. So on the configuration here, we're going to add the same stuff that we had from before. So this is going to be authorization :Microsoft :client ID. Now, you don't have to put Microsoft in there if you're not using others, but ultimately that's what they have on their documentation, and it works really well. If you're going to have more than one, you would want to have, authorization Google or whatever there as well. So that 3-step thing is really nice. So we'll do authorization. I should have just copied this from my here. Authorization Microsoft client secret. And then the client secret again. I need to get a Clippy or something. This is brutal. All right, save that, save that. So that should allow my application to authorize now. Now, granted, my application hasn't even been pushed with the to-do stuff yet, but we'll do that in a minute. The first thing I want to do is enable the authorization on my local app. So here, I shouldn't run that. Let's go ahead and stop it. And in the program.cs file, we have the code already in place. It's right here. It says builder.services.add authentication, add Microsoft, and it's going to leverage those Microsoft client ID and Microsoft client secret for the client secrets. So there's a NuGet package. I've already got that included in this project. It's the Microsoft ASP.NET Core Authentication Microsoft account. This is what allows us to use the authorization from Microsoft. So I have that in place. So if everything's working and I didn't make any mistakes, we should be able to log in with Microsoft at this point. So if I log out and I go to register, there's Microsoft. It's going to ask me to register. It says it's unverified. That's okay. I'm going to consent on behalf of my org, so everybody else won't have to. And then ultimately there I am, and then I can change my email here, brian@example.com, so that I don't accidentally put my stuff in there. Confirming my account because I don't have SendGrid set up or anything to verify my email. Log in, Microsoft, no more passwords. Super nice. Now my tasks are here, and I'm going to add my task, Brian's task number 1. Creating videos. It's definitely in progress, and we are getting very close to the end. So you can see now that I have authorization from Microsoft locally. I have built that in, and I have authorization that all my users are seeing their own tasks only. You aren't able to go to the admin index unless you're in the admin role. So we need to set that up yet. But let's go ahead and get this pushed out to Azure and make sure it works there. And of course, I'm not going to make you watch that process. So if you're watching along with me or just playing along with me, we're just going to go ahead and check this in. Updates for auth and user identity, stuff like that. I don't know. User identity and task tracking. So I'll commit this out to Azure. All right, excuse me. I'll commit it to GitHub, which will push it to Azure. And when that's done, I'll restart the video and we can just double check that everything works at Azure the way we expect it to. All right, so it has deployed. So let's go ahead and double check our application and make sure everything's working the way we think it should. So we'll restart this app here. And let's go ahead and just skip right to Microsoft login. So see if this is going to work on our local machine. So it looks like, or excuse me, out of Azure. So it looks like it's going to. There we go. So now if I go to log in with Microsoft, and I'm in, and I can do my own tasks here. And this is at the Azure instance. So Brian's task number 1 at Azure. And let's just put this as abandoned. Why not? So we can see that we now have that in place. We have Microsoft authentication, and we have regular local authentication as well, if you're interested in that. So everybody can do their own tasks. And everybody's happy. We only see the stuff we're supposed to see and only our tasks. So we're good. So the last thing we need to do is make this thing so that the admin, or whoever is the super admin on the site, can go to this to-do list admin index and can see all of the stuff and do a little bit of modification there. So let's do that next. All right, so the last thing we need to do is add the authentication role for the admin. So in the application, in the iUser roles service, we're going to do a task called ensure users and roles. And in the user roles service, we're going to have information where we're going to generate an admin super user and ultimately then inject the user manager and role manager into that service and be able to do that to work with the roles and the users locally within the application. And we'll have this method we'll expose called ensure users and roles, which will await the ensure roles and ensure users. So create the admin role, create the admin super user, and basically put that in place. And when that's done, we'll have that role called admin, and that page is authorized for the role admin, so we should be good. So to make that happen, we're just going to put a cheesy method here. This is a complete hack, but public async task of iAction result. We'll call this ensure users and roles. How about that? And that way we can leverage it. So in order to make that happen, ensure users and roles, we need to have the await on a thing we're going to call underscore users roles service, and the ensure users and roles is the method we just created, and then we'll just return redirect to action index. So the users, this is going to run idempotently, so they won't even know if they hit it, it'll just go right back to the index. So big deal. If they run it, it'll just basically make sure the users exist. So it's not going to hurt anything if any lay user just happens to go to this link. But what do I do to get my iUser role service? I'll have to inject that into my service here. So let's go ahead and just inject it here as an iUsers roles service. And ultimately we'll call this users roles service. And then I need to store it, private read-only iUsers roles service. And we'll call that the underscore users roles service. Set it here so that it's hydrated. So now everything's in place within the controller so that I could call ensure users and roles. The last thing I need to do is I need to go back to my program.cs and I need to make sure that we inject that service. So the service will be a scoped service, the iUser roles service, and ultimately the implementation will be the user roles service. So all the code's in place, so you should be able to just make it work. You don't have to write the code, but if you want to take some time to look at what those services are doing, you're welcome to do so. The good news is now I should have the ability, anybody could go to this /home/ensure users and roles, and it'll run, and it'll just take you back to index, which should have created my Dr. McCoy user. Dr. McCoy is going to be, so McCoy at ncc1701.com. And ultimately then McCoy's password, which is doctor, not coder. McCoy can log in. Sweet, it worked. And so now you see that McCoy also sees the administrator link and goes to the admin index. And you can see everybody's task there. The one thing that this doesn't do that would need to be updated is track the user ID for that specific item so that you don't lose that reference. And probably if you wanted to add, you would need some sort of like list of users to IDs that they could choose from to make sure that they don't, lose. Like if I edit Tom's task and I don't change his user ID, we'd be in big trouble, right? So it's not completely, the application isn't complete, but this is good enough to show what I wanted to show you today. So as just a quick recap, we have created a web application that does to-do list tasks. We have locked it down so that only the specific user can see their tasks. We have then created authorization on it so that only the admin can use this admin index page. Everybody else just sees the same simple task page, and you can add your tasks and work with them there. We also used Microsoft as a possible sign-in, so you can see how to do a third-party sign-in very easily on the application. And we saw how to do that at Azure as well, pushing everything out to Azure and making it work. So the last step is, of course, just pushing this last step to Azure and making sure that the auth role works there. So again, I won't make you watch that. I'm just going to complete it to wrap this video up. All right, so everything's out at Azure. So let's go ahead and go to the home controller and ensure users and roles. And then let's go ahead and log in as McCoy. And McCoy has administration tasks out here, just like you would expect. And of course, everything else is still working. I can still log in with my Microsoft account. I can still log in as Bob and see everything that only Bob should see in that case, or everything that only I should see in that case. And neither one of us can go to the super admin administration page. So that's going to wrap up this video, and I appreciate your time and thank you for watching. Hopefully you found this useful and informative. Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, we'll catch you next year for the next Festive Tech Calendar. Thank you very much. Have a great holiday season.